In the Quran, it is written, "Behold, in the creation of the heavens and the earth, in the alternation of the night and the day, in the beasts of all kind that he scatters through the earth, here indeed are signs for people that are wise." All the world over, in scripture and in poetry through the ages, people proclaim not only how good the earth is and how blessed, but also how we can learn from it. Here indeed are signs for a people that are wise. In various scripture, we see reference to the natural world not only as a place to uncover lessons for living, but also as a wilderness that will test us. Nature is sometimes cast as the place of temptation or as a place where we get lost. Nature is also presented in fairy tales as a dangerous place, yet also a place where we must go to grow up. The mountaintop, the desert, the woods, and the wilderness each carry a metaphoric or mythic tone that the actual natural locations can truly convey. I have always loved nature, and I grew up spending a lot of time out in the woods. My woods were not dangerous or challenging. My woods were a source of centering and healing. I grew up among the glacier-carved hills just south of Rochester, New York, in a place called Bushnell's Basin. Across the street from my house, the neighbor's backyard dropped down several dozen feet to a broad lowland of trees and clearings that we called the Flats. Every spring and fall, the flats would become a maze of flooded creeks and overgrown puddles. The land was not useful for development, and so was left to go wild with trees and shrubs, left to go wild with the imagination and exploration of children. Once I was old enough to go outside on my own, I spent nearly every nice afternoon down in the flats. In Leaves of Grass, Walt Whitman describes how it sometimes felt for me. He writes, "There was a child who went forth every day, and the first object he looked upon, that object he became. And that object became part of him for the day, or a certain part of the day, or for many years or stretching cycles of years." There is something about the words of poets like Walt Whitman that can capture and articulate my spiritual yearning in ways that no theology or dogma can grasp. Unitarian minister and activist John Haynes Holmes wrote, "Nothing any theologian ever wrote about God has helped me very much, but everything that the poets have written about flowers and birds and skies and seas and the saviors of the race and God, whoever God may be, has at one time or another reached my soul." For me, I find the writings of Wendell Berry, Aldo Leopold, Walt Whitman, and Annie Dillard, Mary Oliver, Chief Seattle. These have led me to a deeper understanding of my spirit. Naturalists, poets, and great orators through the ages helped me to articulate and integrate my experiences of the natural world and the rumblings within my own soul. Yes, the words are often about flowers and birds and sky and sea, but they are also about my spirit and about God and about life lived with a fullness. There was a child went forth every day, and the first object he looked upon, that object he became. And that object became part of him for the day, or a certain part of a day, or for many years, or stretching cycles of years. Those woods around my house became an indelible part of my soul for stretching cycles of years. What have you looked upon? What has held your attention and therefore defined some of who you are? What do you feed your soul? Or what do you feed your soul when you have too much of the world? For me, as a child, it was mostly the flats, as I've said. It felt like I spent years down there, like it was an extension of my own home, like it was a second home. When things were chaotic at home, or more often just empty at home, I would go out into the woods. I was having a share of the chaos imprinted on my soul and that emptiness. It was good for me to also have a base of nature imprinted there as well. I don't want to paint my home life as all bad when I was growing up. There were moments, but I think overall it was a fairly typical life experience for an adult child of an alcoholic household. Time spent in nature became a spiritual touchstone for me. From time to time, as a congregation, we have hosted conversations together about how to handle difficult times. We discuss things that go on in the world or in our lives and talk about what we do when we are in the midst of hard times, what helps. Well, if we give theologians the day off and let only the poets and the naturalists speak, I think Wendell Berry's poem about the heron and the despair gets as close as possible for me. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be. I do that from time to time. I wake at night worrying, fearful of the trouble and the danger in the world, concerned for what my life and my children's lives may be. I worry some nights about the world my children are growing up in. For me, as is implied in Berry's poem, the extra concern for the lives of my children is something that puts it over the edge for me in the realm of despair. I had despair for the world growing in me before I had children. And so don't get me wrong about that. And I don't think that people without children don't understand or experience this anxiety or heartache. But for me, it was having children that raised my worry to a level that included others. It became more than just my own private fears and concerns for the world. Because ultimately what I'm talking about, what I think Wendell Berry is talking about, is bigger than the fear for my own life, or even the fear for what my children's lives may be. It's about what the world is and what's gone wrong. Dealing with greed and injustice, corruption, heartbreak, and cruelty is hard enough. Helping my children learn to deal with it too is that much harder. And as an outgrowth of that, my concern grows beyond myself and my children to include all people around me that I care about. I want to make the world a better place for everyone I care about. And I also want to strengthen everyone I care about to be better able to get through the hard times. So Wendell Berry feels this too. And what does he do? He says, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I remember doing that as well. I didn't have herons and drakes there in the flats when I was growing up, but I remember going out into the woods around my house when I was old enough to think of it as communing with nature. I would go with the express purpose of calming down and getting grounded. I would go with that express purpose. I did find wood drakes and loons, though, in the still water lakes around Camp Unirondack. And the heron, I've probably told the story a dozen times of that experience I had when I was up at Unirondack as a young man, sitting on the dock in the early morning when a heron flew onto the lake and nearly settled on the dock where I sat meditating. It glided past me, less than a foot from my shoulder, where I sat breathless. And I could see the blue feathers, the curve of its neck, the black of its eyes. It swept silently past me and sailed low over the water across the lake, away and out of sight. Even just remembering that experience brings to mind the profound feelings I had of connectedness and peace in that moment. Annie Dillard, after experiencing something like that, for her it was with a tree of lights, she wrote, "I have been all my life a bell and never knew until that moment I was lifted and struck." I think I have spent a good portion of my life since that encounter with the heron, stopping at lakes and looking for birds and listening for that ringing in my soul. What is it about such experiences that change them from seeing another bird as you go through your day to seeing through to the depth of living? Perhaps it's simply an openness on our parts to that might fit any moment that can slip in and crack it open all the way. This morning outside I stood, saw a little red-winged bird shining like a burning bush, singing like a scripture verse. Made me want to bow my head. I remember when church let out, how things have changed since then. Everything is holy now. I have had a handful of encounters like that which have changed me, transformed me, or deepened my sense of the world and my place in the world. Peter Mayer's song there says it so beautifully. I do see that everything is holy now. And I want to talk about God in everything. But the word God on the tongues of too many people is too small a word for what I need it to mean. So for today, let the theologians hush and the poets speak of grace and suffering and beauty and despair. Let the poets tell us something of what this experience has meant, the peace, the presence, the abiding sense of place that I find with the heron in the face of despair. Despair is an isolating experience. Misery and worry turn me inward, cutting me off from my otherwise natural resources. Experiences I carry in my heart of being in nature open me back up, open me outward, open me to my connectedness. Wendell Berry's poem says, "I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water." I come into the presence of that stillness he's talking about. It's that stillness that calms the soul. Whenever I'm on a retreat, a minister's retreat, a writer's retreat, I make an effort to go out and find a wild place. Usually this means the woods, lakes where I can wander around. I remember a retreat from a few years back that was in Florida on the Gulf Coast, and I was unsure what to do with beaches and that big expanse of ocean. My spirit has always been well nourished by green branches and big hills and rambling creeks and still water. Wendell Berry's poem talks of coming into the presence of still water. But as I stood on that beach during that retreat a couple of years back with that wide open, ever rolling water, that expansive, breathing water that is never still, I discovered that my spirit is nourished by water in motion, as well as water in the stillness. The peace and calm that carries me through my trouble that drains my despair of its power. That peace is not simply the peace of still water and the memory of quiet, idyllic nature. The real power of such experiences is in tapping into the rhythm of life itself. It's not the stillness, though it can feel that way for me at times. It's not the stillness, it is instead the even rhythm. The motion and the stillness belong to each other, the song and the silence together. This is the lesson I learned from the natural world. It's not the only lesson it has to offer, but it is the healing one that I learned to trust as a child. Where have you gone for healing and renewal? Your spirit needs nourishment. What do you feed yourself of beauty and love? Where do you turn when worry and despair creep too close to your heart? Wendell Berry goes to where the heron feeds. He goes into the presence of still water. And I feel above me the day-blind stars, he writes, waiting with their light. What an illuminating metaphor. The day-blind stars. What guides you? What guides do you seek out that are normally hidden? The stars are here all day long, shining their light, hidden by the brilliance of the sun. A life of the spirit can be like that too, present within you all the time, though hidden within the ordinariness of living. What do you do to rediscover your center? When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound in fear for what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. And for a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free. Grace. I rest in the grace of the world. I need more grace in my life. Let all those simple meanings of the word pour over you when you hear this line. Grace as the unearned love of God. Grace as the gracefulness of a dancer. Grace as the gratitude offered before a meal. Grace as the extra time offered beyond what is expected. Grace as a gift. For a time, I rest in the grace, the extra time, the gratitude, the elegant dancing movement. I rest in the grace of the world. When I rediscover my center, I rest in the grace of the world. When I feed my spirit on beauty, I rest in the grace of the world. When I find healing and renewal, when I rest in the gratitude, the elegant movement, the extra time, the gift of the world, I am free. When despair for the world grows in me, I know what I can do to be free. It's not fail-proof, but it works often enough to be nearly so. All the world over, in scripture and in poetry through the ages, people have proclaimed not only how good the earth is and how blessed, but also how we can learn from it. Here, indeed, are signs for a people that are wise. Take the time to step aside to rediscover your center. Perhaps for you, as it is for me. There is grace to be found down by the still water, where the wood drake rests in his beauty and the great heron feeds. Perhaps for you, as it is for me, there is a memory and poetry and calm to be found just a breath away from the turmoil of the day. Perhaps when despair comes creeping into your heart and fear for what your life and the lives of those around you that you love may be. There is yet a way for you to let that fear slip by and the despair to leak all its power away, because you have found the way back into the woods where your spirit is nourished and your heart is healed, and you can rest for a time in the elegant movement of life and be free in a world without end. May it be so.